Chapter 18. There was no day or night that passed when I didn't listen for sounds from the sky. Both my sense of touch and my sense of hearing were beginning to make up for my lack of sight. I separated the sounds that each became different. I grew to know the different cries of the birds that flew by the quay, even though I had no idea what any of them were. I made up my own names for them according to the sound they made. Only the occasional bleat of a gull gave me a picture of that bird, for I had heard and seen plenty of them many times around the seawall in Willemstad. I knew how the breeze sounded when it crossed the sea grape. It fluttered in small leaves, and when it went through the palm fronds and the storm had ripped away, it made a flapping noise. I knew the rustle of the lizards, and some were still on the island after the storm. I could only guess they'd somehow climbed high enough into the palms. Otherwise, how would they have lived with the water lapping over the entire quay? I even knew Stu Cat was approaching me. His soft paws on the dry leaf made only the tiniest bit of crackle, but I heard it. One mid-morning in early August, I was on the hill near the camp, and I heard a far-off drone of an airplane. It was upwind for me, but the sound was very clear. I reached down to feel Stu Cat, and he had heard it too. His body was tense, and his head was pointed towards that sound. I dropped to my knees by the fire. Feeling around the edges, I grasped the end of the stick, drew it back. Timothy had taught me to lay the fire sticks like a wheel, so that the fire burned slowly in the center, but always had a few unburned ends on the outside. I tended the fire half a dozen times a day. I spit on the stick, and when I heard this sizzle, I knew there was enough fire or charring to light it off, based on the palm fronds beneath the signal fire. I listened again for the drone. Yes, it was still there. It was closer now. I ran down the hill straight to the signal fire, felt around the palm fronds, and then pushed the stick back over them. I blew on them until I heard a crackle of the flames. In a few minutes, the original fire was roaring, and I ran to the south beach where I would be able to hear the aircraft without hearing the crackling fire. Standing on the south beach, I listened. The plane was coming closer. I yelled towards the sky, "Here, down here!" I decided to run back to the east beach and stand near the fire and the near arrangement of the rocks that spelled help, thinking any moment the plane would dive and I would hear the roar of the engines across the quay and low altitude. But I stood there with Stu Cat a few feet from the sloshing surf. I waited and I waited, but there was no thunder. There was no sound in the sky. I could hear nothing now but the crackling of the fire and the washing sound of the turf. I ran back to South Beach, where I stood very still and listened. The plane was gone. Slowly I returned to the East Beach, sat down in the sea grape. I put my hand down in my arms, and I sobbed, feeling no shame for what I was doing. There seemed to be no hope for this ever leaving this quay, yet I knew I could not always live this way. One day I would become ill, or another storm would rage against the island. I could never survive it alone. There had been many bad and lonely days on the nights on this cade, but this was it. Stu Cat came up, purring, rubbing my legs against him, wondering what the aircraft had not come down with the pilots when they saw the smoke. At last, I thought, perhaps they didn't see the smoke. I knew it was going up in the sky, but it was white smoke. Maybe there was something on there in the blue sky and it was lost, or it was dark and oily smoke would make a smudge against the blueness. Maybe there was no way to tell. If there was only some oily boards, the kind that, drifted up from the waters of the Shot Gap. But I knew that the wood floating in the beach contained mostly branches and stumps. That would have been mostly in water for weeks or months. There was nothing to make the dark smoke. So I began to think of all the things on the island. Green palm fronds. They would send off dark smoke maybe, but until they were dried, they wouldn't work. They were too tough to tear down from the trees. The vines on the north beach might make a dark smoke, but the leaves on them were very, very small. Sea grape! I snapped some off, feeling it between my fingers. Yes, it was very oily. I got up and I put it in the fire, tossing a piece in. In a moment I heard the popping of hot grease and pops when it dropped into the water. I knew now how it must be done. The smoke would rise from the K in a fat black column and lead the planes to Devil's Mouth. If I heard another aircraft, I'd start a fire, and then I'd throw a bunch of sea grape into it until it was certain it was strong a signal that was going up from the island. Timothy hadn't thought of that black smoke. I was sure of that. Feeling better now, I walked up the hill to gather a few palm fronds that were left from the new fire. I woke up at dawn on the morning of August 20th, 1942, to the hear of thunder, and wondered what the first drops of rain would sputter on the roof of the shelter. I heard Stu Cat down by my feet. He let out a growl. I said, "It's only thunder, Stu Cat. We need some water. We need the water." But as I continued to listen, it didn't seem like thunder. It was heavy sound, a hard, sharp, not rolling, more like an explosion. No, it was a series of explosions. I felt the K was shaking. I got up from the mat, moving out from under the shelter. The air did not feel like rain. It was dry. There was no rain or heavy heat. "They're explosions, Stu," I said. "Very near us." Maybe destroyers, I thought. I could not hear any aircraft engines. Maybe destroyers fighting it out in the enemy submarines. And those heavy, hard, sharp sounds could be the depth charges that my father were used by the Navy in the U-boats. This time, I didn't bother to take a piece of the firewood down to the East Beach. I dug into the tin box for the cellophane wrapped package. A big wooden stick of matches were left. I ran down to the hill at the signal fire, and I searched for a rock. Finding one, I knelt down by the fire and struck the match against it. Nothing happened. I felt the head of the match. The sulfur had rubbed completely off. I struck another, making a small popping noise, and then it went out. I had 2 more matches left for the moment. I didn't know whether to use them or run back up the hill to the campfire. I stopped and listened, feeling sweat trickle down my face. The explosions were thundering across the sea. Then I heard a drone of the aircraft. I took a deep breath and struck the next 2 matches, and I heard them flare the fan and ran my hand over the top. There was heat. It was burning. So I reached deep into the pile, holding the match there until it began to burn the tips of my fingers. The fire caught, and then the moment was roaring. I ran across the beach to begin pulling sea grape down. I carried the first bundle to the fire, throwing it on. Soon I began to smell it burning, began to pop and crackle and send flames of natural oils from the branches. By the time I had carried about 10 or 15 bundles of sea grape to the fire, tumbling them in, I was sure that the column of black smoke was rising in the sky over the K. Suddenly, the deafening roar swept overhead. I knew it was an aircraft crossing the K, not much higher than the palms. I could feel the wind from it. Forgetting for a moment, I yelled, "Timothy, they've come!" The aircraft seemed to be making a sharp turn. It marred across the K and seemed even lower this time because the rush of the wind was hot. I could smell exhaust fumes. I yelled, "Down here! Down here!" and I waved my arms. The plane made another tight circle back, almost directly over me, and its engine was screaming. I shouted at Stu Cat, "We'll be rescued!" But I think he'd gone and hidden in the sea grape. This time, however, the aircraft did not circle back. It did not make another low pass over the island. I heard the sound going away. Soon it had vanished completely. Then I realized the explosions had stopped too. A small silence settled over the K. All the strength went out of my body. It was the first real chance of a rescue. Maybe there would not be another one. The pilot had flown away, perhaps thinking I was just another native fisherman waving at an aircraft. I knew the color of my skin was very dark now. Worse, I knew the smoke might have blotted out the lines that spelled help. Feeling very ill, I climbed up the slope again, throwing myself down on the mat in the hut. I didn't cry. There was no use in doing that. I just wanted to die. After a while, I looked over to Timothy's grave and I said, "Why didn't you take me with you?"